Every day we hear about the importance of vaccines and how they're our best path forward in our battle against COVID-19. Today, we turn our attention to individuals, past and present, who have impacted public health through vaccines. In the early 1700s, smallpox was going through New England and other American colonies. In Massachusetts, colonists there saw smallpox arrive with cargo ships to Boston over and over again. There was not much the authorities could do beyond imposing quarantines and treating the sick. This changed in 1721, thanks to the wisdom passed on from Onesimus, an enslaved African man. Onesimus was purchased for cotton mather, an influential Puritan minister, by his congregation in 1706. Mather gave him the name Onesimus after an enslaved man in the Bible whose name meant useful. Onesimus shared with Mather that he had undergone an operation which had given him something of the smallpox and would forever preserve him from it, and whoever had the courage to use it was forever free from the fear of contagion. He was describing the practice of variolation. Variolation consisted of first taking infectious material like pus from the blisters of smallpox patients. A healthy person then received the material through a cut in the skin in a controlled manner under the supervision of a physician. This was done so that the smallpox symptoms would be milder and still confer some sort of immunity in the future. The variolation method of inoculation was long practiced in Africa among sub-Saharan people. The practice was widespread among enslaved colonial people from many regions of Africa and throughout the slave trade in the Americas. Slave communities continue to practice the inoculation despite regional origin. Of course, the procedure was not without risk. People still developed severe symptoms and even died from smallpox via variolation. But those who died were in much smaller proportion than those who acquired it naturally from another person. The pastor did not believe him at first, but eventually Cotton Mather began to research the practice of variolation. He found that it was practiced in many parts of the world, not just Africa. Places like China and Turkey had their own versions of variolation based on the same principle of exposing a person under controlled circumstances rather than allowing them to contract it naturally. In fact, the practice was so effective in conferring immunity that enslaved Africans sold in Massachusetts at the time were deemed to be more valuable if they bore the scar of variolation. This research encouraged Cotton Mather to push for variolation in the colonies. He burned some of his political and social capital in advocating for variolation. But even though the idea was met with backlash, it did help vaccinate many and slow down the speed of the epidemic in Boston. Onesimus would go on to partially purchase his freedom, but he still remained in the service of Cotton Mather. His contribution to the understanding of smallpox and its prevention lives on today, but the story of his contribution to modern medicine is not told enough. Now, let's transition to 2020 and the current pandemic. North Carolina-born scientist Dr. Kizmika Kizzy Corbett is an American viral immunologist and an expert on the front lines of the global race for a COVID-19 vaccine. Someone who will go down in history as one of the key players in developing the science that could end the pandemic. She was one of the National Institutes of Health's leading scientists behind the government search for a vaccine. Corbett is a part of a team at NIH that worked with Moderna, the pharmaceutical company that developed one of the two vaccines that has shown to be more than 90% effective. Even before Corbett took on one of the most challenging tasks of her professional career, she was a force to be reckoned with. As a student, she was selected to participate in Project SEED, a program for gifted minority students that allowed her to study chemistry in labs at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and eventually landed a full ride at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Corbett spent her summers at laboratories and earned a summer internship at the NIH, the very place where she would be instrumental in developing a vaccine for the coronavirus. After graduating, Corbett enrolled in a doctorate program at UNC Chapel Hill, where she worked as a research assistant studying virus infections and eventually received a PhD in microbiology and immunology. Her work with such pathogens began when she joined the NIH's Vaccine Research Center as a postdoctoral fellow in 2014. Early in the pandemic, when Dr. Fauci predicted the world might see an effective vaccine in about a year, Corbett said that she knew it was possible. This past year, she put her last 6 years of training to work. Dr. Corbett said that her participation in the development of a COVID-19 vaccine marked an important step forward for young scientists and people of color, stating, "I felt like it was necessary to be seen and to not be a hidden figure, so to speak. I felt that it was important to do that because the level of visibility that it would have to younger scientists and also the people of color who've often worked behind the scenes and essentially who have done the dirty work for the large efforts towards a vaccine. Onesimus and Dr. Corbett have made the world a better and safer place for all of us." Thank you for listening to my short part of the church service today, and back to Pastor Glenn.